again as we continue to learn on the Making Wealth series. Today, we continue the conversation on debt, and we're going to talk about something interesting. This is interest rates. So, what's interest rates and how does it relate to debt, and how do we kind of understand it and know how to maneuver it? So, one, we already detailed that debt is when we borrow money or when we take money for a certain use over and above what we have as our income. And because most times when we take that money, we would borrow it from an institution or even from an individual, then there tends to be an amount over and above the amount that we borrowed that we pay back with what we borrowed. So that's what we call interest. It's the additional sum on top of what we borrowed. Now, interest rates becomes key because it determines the cost of debt. So when we borrow from an individual, they are free to determine the cost of interest. So someone can say, oh, you're my friend, maybe just give me 5%, or you're my family, give me 2%. So that's different. That's very personal that you agree. But when we borrow from institutions and places that are standardized, they have interest rates that they work with. All governments have what we call a central bank. And from that central bank, they regulate how the finances of a country operates. And one of the things that they give a guidance on is a minimum or maximum amount of interest rate. And this tends to be referred to as the interest rate cap. Pause there. I know it's a lot to think about for a moment, but it's something important to know. For example, in Kenya, the central bank rate usually is between 7% to 9%, at least in the last 5 years. This has been adjusted for things like inflation, for the pandemic, but this kind of creates a guideline for the area around which or the amounts around which then commercial banks set their interest rates and also other lending institutions. It's a bit of a difficult place because based on other factors that banks put into consideration or lending institutions put into consideration, and one of the key factors being the risk element of the particular lending facility they're offering, then they are able to adjust interest rates in a certain way. That's very important to note. There's a bit of standardization, but there's also a leeway around which these rates can move. The second thing is what type of interest rates does one take when they are taking a lending facility? So one, there's a fixed interest rate. So this means throughout whatever the cost of your lent facility, you're going to be charged a constant amount. So if it's 12%, it's 12% all through. Alternatively, there is what we call a reducing interest rate. So this means as the lending facility increases, so as I pay off my debt, then either the amount against which I pay interest reduces or the interest rate reduces. So kind of key things to think about as we're trying to understand interest rates. There's still a lot more to unpack on that, but it's just to be key. Always try and think through interest rates because interest rates really are the cost of debt. Some facilities have even been calculated to the extent of realizing you pay up to twice or thrice, over the amount you've taken in interest rates. So in the event that you're taking a lending facility, be cautious to pay attention to what's happening around the interest rates. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to continue to build up this conversation. It's a how.